Hello, my name is Shantae Okoyen, and today we will be joined by Michelle Shelfer, and we're going to be talking about her book, Prepare a Room, A Path to Peace and Healing for Those Hurt by Abortion. Thank you so much for joining us today for this interview.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, yes. So my very first question is that we just kind of want to know a little bit about yourself. So can you tell us a bit about you?
Yes, well, I come from a Jewish background. I was raised in a secular Jewish home. My mother is a Holocaust survivor, so it's really unlikely that I would ever encounter Jesus, but he has his ways of reaching out to even the most unlikely people. And so I did encounter Jesus and become a Christian about 16 years ago, already in my late 40s. And then for those of you watching who are familiar with Village Baptist, I immediately in that same year became a part of your grandfather's church. And so we know each other from that setting.
Yes, we've known you for a very long time. So can you tell us a little bit about your personal story with abortion and how this book came to be?
Yes, well, I did have an abortion experience. And the reason that it occurred had everything to do with my lifestyle and also the way that I was raised up and taught. First of all, I was taught that every woman has a right to an abortion, and that the abortion was what you might think of as the signature event in a feminist young woman's life. When she declares, it's my body, I can do what I want. It's a statement of independence and a statement of autonomy, and my body, myself, and all that kind of indoctrination that filled my head. And what goes along with it is sexual freedom and sexual expression, and that was very much a part of who I was and was taught to be, even by my parents, to just explore life and live without too many rules. The house that I grew up in, as I told you, was secular, so there really was no touchstone of God or morality as it's taught in the Bible. I didn't have any of that teaching. So it was really just sort of a free spirit doing whatever I wanted to do. And when you have that kind of life experience, you generally do end up pregnant. And so I did. And I was pregnant with my now husband's child. We were boyfriend and girlfriend at the time. When the pregnancy test came up positive, I treated it as though, yay, this is my opportunity to take that bold move and take that step to really experience that signature feminist experience of having an abortion. Now I'm going to be one of those girls. But it became immediately apparent to me, in fact, it was absolutely immediate the moment that the event occurred, that I had done something absolutely dreadful and I had made a terrible mistake. And I was absolutely distraught and traumatized very much by it. And that stuck with me. Long story short, I really didn't deal with it for a long time, but found that it was expressing itself in funny ways in my life, which I talk about in the book. But eventually, when I became a Christian, it became a real stumbling point for me because I was not able to receive the full forgiveness that Jesus offered because I considered that was beyond his reach. It was just too awful. So I went through my own process of finding the ability to, through his grace, to really receive the forgiveness that he offered. And when, so the book really grows out of that because I began to be a point person for my local pregnancy resource center. So when women would call in with a emotional crisis regarding an abortion that they had, they would call me and I would be called upon to give this person guidance. But so many times I found that these people were doing this push-pull dance where they start clearly in crisis and clearly with an urgent need, but the moment that you reach out to them, kind of like a scared animal who's starving, but you can't quite get to them because they retreat. So the issues of shame, the issues of guilt, just the filthiness of the topic, the fact that the culture treats it as a taboo made it very difficult for me to reach in any kind of helpful way. So thus was born the idea, well, maybe I should just write a book. And then they can take it to their house. They can just go close the door. They don't have to talk to me or anybody. They can just deal with it on their own. So that was the reasoning behind the book.
Wow, awesome. You mentioned a little bit about how sometimes the culture can indoctrinate us and teach us things. What harmful things do you think that the culture has taught us when it comes to abortion?
Well, I really think that the culture, and when I say culture, I mean specifically media and even what's taught in colleges and schools and what entertainers are saying and what's being talked about in songs and song lyrics and so on. The culture in general really celebrates sexual convenience and freedom from the consequences of our sexual behaviors. So they're really pushing sexuality, and particularly on younger and younger people. And sexual freedom, the kind that I was raised with, it's been updated and brought into the new, more modern culture, but it's still very much being promoted. And that culture has an investment in shutting down and closing any door on the possibility that there may be something wrong that happens to a woman, some trauma, some syndrome even, you might call it, that happens to a woman when she has an abortion. They have an investment in closing the door on that conversation because that threatens, then you'd have to scrutinize abortion and say, well, if it's doing something harmful to the woman, maybe that calls into question the morality of abortion. We certainly don't want to do that. We have to be able to have that freedom, have the freedom to have the abortion. And there's just a kind of a cascading set of lies, I think, and cover up. So really, that's why I have a picture of an open door here. I'm trying to open a door that's been shut. Women are silenced. Women are in a situation where they're dealing with a taboo. There's no place to go to talk about it. Where would you go? Where would you go? I had therapists calling me saying, I don't know how to talk to my patient about this. I've never had that experience, so I don't even know how to help this person. So that's what they're doing that's harmful, is they're shutting the door. And I'll tell you a funny thing. I was just hearing about how there's a psychological designation for something called doom scrolling. Now, doom scrolling is when you get so upset and depressed because of all the scrolling that you do on your iPhone. So they've got a designation for that. They probably have a designation for, trauma from an ingrown hair. But God forbid that you should actually question that there may be something wrong when the most invasive procedure that takes a life, hormonal imbalance occurs and emotional trauma occurs, but yet we can't talk about that. We can't talk about that. So my husband calls me the skunk at the garden party. I'm the one that's just going to stink up the room and say, well, I have to talk about the things that are hard to talk about. Yeah. That's what I'm here to do.
Yeah, in the book, this was the first time I had heard of PASS, which is post abortion stress syndrome, correct? Yes, and that was the first time for me I'd ever even heard of that. Now I knew as a concept, obviously, someone who has an abortion is probably going to feel something different. Your body's going through something very traumatic, but I've never in the media, at least, ever heard about it. So do you think that this is something that maybe the church should take a step forward in and trying to help these women who are dealing with PASS or PASS?
I absolutely do feel very strongly about that. I think that the church is under the same taboo as the rest of the culture, frankly, that there's not an open door even in a church setting. Who can I talk to? Is there someone I can talk to? There's not necessarily an open door even in a church. It's silenced. It's kind of on the down low. We all do it, but we don't really talk about it. I kind of had to, so whatever, I'll just deal with it. So women are really left on their own, even in a church. And yes, I'm all for tearing open those boxes that are closed out of just fear of shame. There's, are we not going to talk about pornography? Are we not going to talk about divorce? Are we not going to talk about the things that are difficult to talk about just because they're difficult? I mean, those are the things that need to be talked about the most. And this is one such thing.
Right. The church over time has been met with so much, I guess you can say, adversity because of the way that they have attacked those who have had abortions, or the imagery that you see in media. I'm an actor. And so a lot of the shows that I see when you're portraying a Christian and there's abortion in the same scene, you see them screaming at young girls walking into clinics. You see, the social media posts of "you're a murderer" and really, really strong language like that, that would, I think, make anybody run away from the church.
Yes.
What kind of things can we do as Christians to begin to dismantle that view and look more like Christ?
Well, stop judging and condemning, I guess, and come with some compassion and some love. I mean, we have to take our sins and put them at the foot of the cross. And this person may not have had an abortion, but she has no right to judge this person who has. She's done her own set of mess, right? She's made her own mess, and she had to come before the Lord and bring it to the foot of the cross and seek forgiveness. And so does this person here. And if we can just, in a kind and loving and gentle and non-condemning way. I mean, the example that I use in the book has to do with the way that Jesus treated the woman caught in adultery. So, like you said, here's the church just wanting to stone her and just give her the punishment that she's due. She is due the punishment of death under ancient Hebrew law. That was her punishment. It was a righteous punishment. But what did Jesus do? He dismissed the others, reminding them that they also were sinners. And then he said, I don't condemn you either. Just don't do it again. Let your heart be transformed. Don't engage in that behavior anymore, but you are offered forgiveness. And so, the voice that I'm coming through with here is a voice of compassion and as much love as I can summon for these women, because, oh my goodness, they're suffering. They're suffering, and they're suffering alone. And by the way, speaking to the portrayal of the screaming people at the abortion clinics, I just have to say that my husband and I, before we were married, 3 months after that abortion experience, I got pregnant again. And I went yet again to another abortion appointment, which I did not follow through on. And I think one of the reasons that I had the presence of mind to say, I'm sitting in the waiting room, but I'm actually going to go to the desk now and get my money back and walk out, is because there were women outside the clinic praying. They weren't yelling at me. The reality is that they're praying in most cases. They're restricted by law from being too aggressive. So they just appeal to God. That group was praying for me as I went in. And what happened? I got married. My husband proposed to me in the parking lot of the abortion clinic. And we got married, and I was 6 months pregnant when we were married, and my son is now the father of 5 wonderful children, and it's a wonderful story. And I'm very grateful to those women, and I actually thank them in the book. So that's not always the story. That's the Hollywood portrayal.
Right. And when you have the media, you're always going to get a very specific portrayal that fits whatever they believe. And so there was something else that you mentioned in the book about different abortion stories. Can you kind of expound on that a little bit, of what that means to have different abortion stories?
Well, that was the great challenge in this book, is to speak to all the great range of people with some unified message, because everyone's story is different. You've got rich people getting abortions, and you've got poor people getting abortions. You've got people who are forced to abort and people who do it as birth control. You've got every race, virtually every nation in the world. You've got abortions going on everywhere. So how in the world am I, young, old, and the people who are processing their emotional feelings about what they went through, the trauma that they experienced? The person who picks up this book may be 50 years old or maybe 18 years old. How in the world am I going to speak to all these people? And so I really just broke it down to be as simple and generalized as I could in order to reach everyone. But the book is specifically written to people who don't necessarily know Jesus yet, or don't know him fully. Maybe they think they do. Maybe they're sitting in the pews, but yet, like me, they didn't have a way of understanding the totality of his forgiveness. So it's written for people who don't know Jesus and for people who do. It's written for as many, anybody and everybody, including some men. We do address, although not as much as a woman, but we do address men's issues as well in the book.
Which I did appreciate reading that, because I do think that is an aspect sometimes people don't think about, the people who were the fathers, that they have also have feelings and things that they're going through as well. But even in reading the book, that was something that I thought of myself, was there's a very kind and careful nature to the words that are used and the phrases that are used, where I felt like if I wasn't a Christian, I would feel like it was a safe place for me to express myself and to learn, and I wouldn't feel condemned. And so I really did sense that as I was reading the book as well. So
Glad to hear that.
good. Something recently that I have been watching, I've been rewatching Grey's Anatomy. And there's an episode recently where one of the characters, she didn't have a good upbringing, and now she's married and has a great job, but she decides to go back and find her birth mother. And in going back and finding her birth mother, she finds out a lot of stuff that she didn't want to know about how she was conceived, about, what her father was like, all of those things. And so when she comes back home, her marriage is now affected by the way that she feels, and her career, everything is kind of up in the air. One of the things she says is that, she wishes that she would have never done it. Why did I go back looking? Why did I go back searching? And so for a lot of women who have dealt with abortions in the past, or maybe their children have had abortions, or maybe a close friend or something like that, they kind of didn't really deal with it, but they feel better now. Do you think it's helpful to go back and to reevaluate, that portion of your life if you didn't really, or do you feel like that might, stir up past hurts and people may want to avoid it because of that?
Oh, it's going to stir up hurts. Of course it is. You can't suddenly decide, well, I'm going to open that box and see what's in there and look closely at it without expecting that there's going to be consequences. Right. And it's not going to be an easy road. And this is why I set up so much and talk about preparing the rooms, because I really feel like don't minimize the process that you are embarking on here. This is something that will impact all your relationships. Hopefully, when you come through to the other side, it impacts them for the better. But sometimes you got to make an egg, omelet, break eggs and all that before you have the finished product. Not that there is such a thing as a finished,
right,
emotional state when we're dealing with these things. But just to say that, yes, it will stir up things. Sure, I can understand a person saying, I don't want to dig it all up. Why would I want to do that? But then you really do need to weigh that decision carefully. I honor that decision. But what are you, either way, you're going to pay a price. You're either going to pay a price in having new emotions erupt that will change things, or you're going to pay a price in that you're going to keep the Band-Aid on there and keep those feelings shoved down to the bottom of the wastebasket so you don't have to look at them too closely. And what results from that? So for everybody, that's different too. Maybe you're having nightmares. For me, I invented an imaginary friend and didn't even realize for decades that this was a place saver for the child that I had aborted, and how she interacted with me, and the way that I treated my dog, like a baby, maybe a little overdoing it with the love for an animal. And everyone has different symptoms. For some, it's very serious. It'll take you to suicide for some people. For others, maybe it's not so serious. But that's the kind of assessment that you have to make. Which price do I want to pay? You're going to pay a price either way.
Okay. Do you think, also in the book, you'd mentioned some people wanting to commit suicide, and you refer them to the suicide hotline or to speak with a pastor or a rabbi or something like that. Do you feel like this is if someone does decide to go on this journey to look back at these things and try to heal, that they have somebody go along this journey with them?
Of course, that would be ideal, to not do it alone. But some people don't have anybody. Ideally, you have a close friend, or you have a husband or a wife, you have a church family or a women's group or something, or your mother, or somebody who is not going to condemn you and judge you through the process, someone who will respect your confidentiality particularly. That's very important. To go through it alone, I really think that's a very difficult thing. That's a very difficult thing, and I feel for those women who are on that road by themselves, because you do need the perspective of being able to just talk to somebody about things. But the book is designed for that, and it's designed for groups. It's designed for anybody to use under any circumstances. But ideally, you're not doing it alone. You're doing it with someone, ideally, who's had the same experience and maybe who's further along the road than you.
So could you tell us a little bit about the Foundlings?
I would love to talk about the Foundlings. I love the Foundlings. So the Foundlings is a collection of drawings that I'm doing on a daily basis using my artistic training. And the reason that I'm doing these drawings every day is twofold. First of all, I want to honor and give a face to the faceless children, 1.72 billion who've been lost in abortion worldwide in the last 40 years. And the second reason is that the child that I aborted played an absolutely central role in my journey to peace and healing and accepting the forgiveness of Jesus. So I think of these foundling drawings as being ambassadors of God's grace and forgiveness. And my hope is that they will act as ambassadors for other people as well. Mm-hmm. So you can see all the foundlings. There's 143 of them as of today on our website. You can see a small sampling of them in black and white in the back of the book. And you can even buy them.
Oh, awesome.
We made prints of 11 that we selected to print
great. Up. There was another question that I thought of I was going to ask you. For a lot of people, we know that abortion is a very touchy, sensitive subject. And we know that we should never shy away from talking about things that are difficult. We should never shy away from truth. But at the same time, how do you think we can, in the best way, speak about abortion without being quiet, but without, ruining our chances of actually bringing people in and helping people, whether they become Christians or not, even just helping them heal?
I think an invitation is a good idea. And maybe preparing, if you're a pastor in a congregation or a representative in a congregation, to say, we're going to be talking about this at such and such a time in this room. And for those of you who have that need, why don't you just come and join us? And so it's not sort of thrown on everybody. Give people a chance to acclimatize themselves to the fact that there's going to be something going on that maybe they're a little uncomfortable with, maybe even talk about that. You may be uncomfortable with what I'm saying and so on. Be upfront about it. But I think it's also a really good idea to educate the congregation, if we're talking about speaking to churches, educate them on the need to talk about it. Maybe they don't know. Maybe the people who have no abortion experience don't even know that there's people sitting next to them in the pews who are suffering in silence and have need. Maybe they don't even know that. And maybe the woman in need has not even yet made the connection between some of her dysfunctional behaviors or self-destructive tendencies and the abortion experience that she had. So if you can educate in a very gentle and loving way, and the reason that I made this book, this bright colors, is I feel like I'm an ambassador from a joyful place, reaching out to somebody who's in a drab and dark place, where the colors don't look like that. The colors are gray and dark. And I want to just reach out and say, you have joy ahead of you. I'm an ambassador from a place that's in your future. You have something to look forward to. It's worth the trouble.
Thank you so very much for speaking with us today. And can you tell the people where we could purchase your book?
Yes, it's on Amazon, and it's available through my publisher, who's Nordskog Publishing, Nordskog kogpublishing.com. And I'm happy to speak to anybody who wishes to speak about it.
Awesome. Thank you again so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.